All right, Doug Larson here with the Daily BS. I got a question from @MooLikeCow on Twitter. He's asking how to overhead squat without getting sore wrists. So there's a lot of factors there that play into how your wrists feel with weight overhead. A few of them, if you have very long arms, you might have to grab very wide to do a snatch and have it hit you right on your hips like it's supposed to. So I have very long arms. I grab all the way out to the collars. Then when I'm overhead, it's not really that high above my head, and I have a pretty steep wrist angle here because it's so wide. The wider the weight is, the more my wrists will have to bend in order to get the weight, or my elbows locked out in order to get the weight all the way on my palm. So if you're a person that has very long arms and you have to grab very wide on the bar, if you have adequate shoulder mobility and you can overhead squat with a more narrow grip, that'll put you in a slightly more straight wrist position where you're not having to crank to the side, kind of like this when you grab super wide. So if you're snatching, go ahead and grab as wide. But if you're just doing overhead squats, if you're pulling off of blocks, or if you're, if you're doing like a behind the neck jerk and then going into an overhead squat after jerking it overhead and you're not actually snatching the weight, then it's okay to try to narrow up your grip a little bit, and it'll probably save your wrists over time. Same thing, especially if you're doing high repetition sets. If you're doing overhead squats in a Metcon, for example, it will probably save your wrists to go a little bit more narrow, but you need better shoulder mobility overhead in order to overhead squat with a more narrow grip. Generally, if you lack mobility, it's easier to overhead squat with a wider grip. Okay? So that's one little variation you can do. Another thing that I want to mention is, obviously you just got to have good technique. So if I'm a person who, I'll go this way. If I'm a person who overhead squats and I'm very upright and my wrist is fairly straight here, that's a good thing. If I'm always way bent over like this and my arms are way behind me and I'm internally rotated at the shoulder and I'm hyperextending my wrist all the time in order to get into a good position, if I look like this all the time, okay, where I'm broken at the shoulder and I'm broken at the wrist, as opposed to being here where I have a straight wrist, locked out elbows, and a more vertical torso, then I'm gonna have more trouble with my wrists. I'm gonna have more pain in my wrists. So a couple things on that. If you're a person that has a super long torso, short limbs, and great mobility, then you're probably gonna have less stress on your wrists. If you're a person that has longer limbs and a short torso and bad mobility, then more than likely you're gonna be the person that catches the overhead squat like this, and you're gonna have pain in a lot of places, probably not just your wrist. If you can push your knees forward still with your weight on your heels and get a more upright torso, then it's more likely that you're gonna be able to keep a straight wrist and come up out of that position with that straighter wrist where you're not broken and hyperextended, and then hopefully you'll have less wrist pain as a result. The other thing is that snatches might not be the only thing that is stressing your wrist. We do a lot of overhead activity. You're doing thrusters and jerks and push presses and on and on and on. So, look at your front rack position also and your position overhead with those other movements. If you can take the stress off your wrist and those other movements too, it'll probably start to feel better on your snatches. So those are things that we talk a lot about in maximum mobility, how to get adequate shoulder mobility, adequate wrist mobility, adequate ankle mobility to put yourself in a good position, so you have enough mobility to have good technique on all the movements you do, not just your overhead squat and your snatches. So if you have more questions about this, go ahead and tweet us at Barbell Shrugged, or you can ask us on Facebook, or always you can go to barbellshrugged.com and ask a question.
If you like this video or any of our other videos, make sure to share it on your Facebook wall by clicking share and then the Facebook icon, and then also like it. Thanks, Truck Thugs.